Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are sorry for this delay because some data were being visualized for display on screen when the rapporteurs or moderators will present their results, which were achieved during the work groups sessions. So in a moment we'll start. We'll have 9 rapporteurs or moderators or anyone from the group who will be presenting, and since we'll have about half an hour according to schedule, we would like to ask every one of you stick to these maybe 3 minutes of report of the main points of the work groups. And if Andrius is ready and the materials are ready, we are about to begin. And I'll just announce every group, its title, and I'll ask the representative of that group to come on stage and to these microphones and present your findings or conclusions or recommendations. So the first group, A1, Implementing Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions, Co-Fund. And it will be presented by... Yeah, please.
Yes, hello, I'm the rapporteur of the A1 group. My name is Brigita Serafinavičiūtė. I work here in the same building, but for the Research Council of Lithuania. And this morning we had a discussion about implementing Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions. We had 3 good examples presented from Czech Republic and Estonia. They were presented by Mikhail, Kadri, and Martin. And so the main message we want you to take home from our discussions. So the message for the research funders and for researchers is that yes, that's the message. Try it yourself. Try to use Co-Fund and do not be discouraged to do that. You can use the experience you have in your national contact points, because as Estonia example proved, well, they are very helpful in implementing the program and writing the proposal. And try not once. Well, if you try, you don't succeed, don't be discouraged, try again, improve your project, your program, redesign it, try it again, and you will succeed. And, well, why to try? Because Co-Fund provides good experiences in widening regional and national participation through increased international dimension. Co-Fund is a good means for transferring knowledge through mobile researchers, and that in turn is a powerful tool to establish more international collaboration. Furthermore, Co-Fund has some leverage effects on local and international funds. And last but not least, that increases and enhances career perspective for co-funded researchers. And that's thanks to Marie Curie label. So try it yourself. That's the message.
Thank you very much. B1, Supporting Independence of Researchers. Moderator, Professor Liudvika Leičytė.
And also the rapporteur, Tomas Kalavičius. Our session was about supporting this bridge between the early career researcher becoming a full-fledged PI at a laboratory level and a leader. bridging the Death Valley between those two areas. That was a key topic. We had the pleasure of having Professor Engelbrecht, the Vice President of Estonian Academy of Sciences, Professor of Center of Excellence at Tallinn University of Technology. We also had Professor Thomas Schäfer, Research Professor from Polymat, University of the Basque Country, as well as Isolde von Bülow from Munich, Ludwig Maximilian University, and Anas Ziadin from University of Eastern Finland, a PhD student. So basically there are two main topics we would like to report on. One is external means, the other is about researchers, what researchers can do themselves. Regarding external means, funding with freedom to manage the funding themselves, that's a very important argument for the funding bodies. Providing facilities, laboratories for the early stage career researchers to establish their own labs. Also early involvement in different research administration activities. Providing mobile pensions and social security for early stage. There is a lot of talk about already established researchers, but the other story is when you are in this transition, what do you do with your social security? We also talked about programs and centers for career kickoff. So what kind of frameworks can facilitate the starting of the career? There are quite a few good examples in different countries, especially the UK example of the framework that was presented yesterday was mentioned. Finally, openness to young researchers' opinions and initiatives was stressed, especially their involvement and participation and taking into account their views in the decision-making bodies at all levels.
Okay, and part for young researchers, so basically what they could do, they have to take initiatives themselves. So actually they have to work for it, and they have to accept responsibility for what they are doing and for their own career. And of course, nobody is going to give you something. You have to look for funding yourself, and young researchers should be ready to move around. So all these mobility issues, if you are not able to find something in your home country or maybe your place where you do your PhD, you have to move and to find something good. And then networking is very important. You have to find people with whom you can collaborate and continue your research. And there are plenty of examples where you can either use it for mobility, collaboration, networking. So for example, cost-targeted network site generation. And of course, publishing. You have to publish your results. You have to show that you work. But basically, our message for young researchers is that you can do it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now we have C1, generating jobs via initiatives for researchers. Moderator, Professor Roel Imets, if I'm correct, from Tartu University. Yeah, and please stick to 3 minutes, not more, or even 2.
But the question is, where is my presentation, yeah? Let's use that one. Let's see. Okay, thank you. As it was said, I am from Tartu University. My name is Raul Eamets, and the rapporteur was my colleague Katrin Tamm from the University of Tartu as well. So we had three presentations, Professor Asta Prunciene from Kaunas University of Technology, and two PhD students, Kristina Perkovic from University of Zagreb and Ana-Rita Ribeiro from University of Porto. Unfortunately, one representative from the Irish Research Council, Dr. Meehan, was not presented, but despite of that, we pick up a few messages, important messages from our understanding from these presentations. And as it was stressed in the first presentation and also stressed late in discussion, that the growing importance of entrepreneurship skills in the BSc programs, and even I would add from my own side, I assume that entrepreneurship skills should be developed even before BSc programs, but at least they must be part of the BSc programs if they haven't. If the BSc students have don't have any skills before, let's say in a bachelor or a master level studies. Secondly, as one PhD student stressed, she presented her view to interdisciplinary research, and the important message was that any kind of interdisciplinary research cannot be done alone. You need team, whom to talk, whom to share your experience, needs active interaction and engagement with work group members from other disciplines. So the message was the research should be done in teams. And the third point concerned the different eligibility criteria of EU funded schemes. They often too strict for different areas of research and countries. We need much more flexibility in EU rules, taking into consideration of the discipline differences and country-specific differences. Thank you.
Thank you. D1, implementing charter and code in funding programs. Moderator, Dr. Dagmar Meyer.
Okay. Yes, we kept it short and sweet, or sweet and short. So we have two recommendations from the workshop. I'm just reading what we have written here, because I haven't seen the slides before. Okay, so, well, the title of the workshop was Implementing Charter and Code in Funding Programs, full stop. And basically, the recommendation is, yes, they should be, the Charter and Code or the underlying principles should be actually implemented in funding programs. And that concerns, of course, both national programs, programs that work at disciplinary level, that are cross-national, and of course also at the EU level, in particular in the Horizon program, where unless there have been any late changes, this is actually happening. So this is of course a positive development. And we had three speakers. The first speaker was Justin Sinnott from University College Dublin, where he explained in a very nice way how the efforts of his university were actually interacting nicely with the requirements to implement Charter and Code principles in the CoFund program. So it wasn't necessarily triggered by the CoFund application, but he showed very nicely how the changes that were taking place at the institutional level were actually in line fully with the requirements of CoFund. So this just to make the connection also to another workshop. So while the recommendation is, yes, Charter and Code should be implemented in national and not only national, in all kinds of funding schemes, the important word here is meaningful. Because we had a little bit of a discussion, how should this actually take place? Should this be really top-down and in a very strict and restrictive manner? And the answer is, of course, no. The Charter and the Code have 40 different items, and of course you always have to take into account the national context, the different institutional backgrounds, etc. So not all of the 40 items may always be relevant, but on the other hand some may be indispensable. So it's a good exercise would also be for funding organizations to participate themselves in the human resources strategy process, which is, as some of you may know, a 5-step process to see where there are weaknesses in the implementation of the principles underlying the Charter and the Code. And this process is also open to the funders. So the funders could possibly be the recommendation, should really see where they themselves might be able to integrate in some, maybe not in all of their funding schemes, and always depending on the nature of the scheme, the principles underlying the Charter and the Code, and some of them also, of course, apply to the funding organization themselves in terms of the selection, that it should be transparent, that it should be open, that it should be merit-based, etc. And then some of the other principles might be passed down to the institutions, to the researchers, to the organizations that will eventually receive the funding, and that could be done through the funding criteria. Yes, there was also one comment that was made, namely, again, with regard to the question how strict should it be, how imposing should it be, and should individual researchers possibly be excluded from receiving funding because the institution they want to join may not be yet up to speed and may not have all the principles implemented yet. And of course that is a very difficult question, and where really a good balance needs to be found between imposing conditions on institutions and possibly on a whole research system, and at the same time not penalizing individual researchers, because at the end of the day we want to fund excellent research or very good research. And so one has to take very good care that individuals will not suffer and actually be penalized twice by the fact that the institution they want to join may not yet be fully compliant. And then another issue that came up was, and that was in particular in the presentation by Tom Arbuckle, who argued from the point of view of a researcher that there are a couple of points in the Charter and the Code that may simply now, 8 years after its adoption, not be completely up to date anymore. So there is of course in the Charter and the Code itself it says this document will be reviewed on a regular basis, and the question is of course what should that mean? I mean a review is not necessarily a complete rewriting, but some parts of some items in the Charter and the Code may actually now be so fully integrated in national legislation, for example, or simply in institutional practices, that what the document currently says may actually be weaker than what we already have on the ground. And maybe also some other aspects, in hindsight, we might want to formulate them slightly differently. So the Charter and the Code itself needs some updating, or as we said, some tweaking to take into account the development since its adoption. And here, of course, it will be important, if this actually takes place, to fully get on board all the stakeholders and to make this an inclusive process, just as it was the case with the original document. And I think this is all. Thank you.
Thank you. E1, Seeking Flexible Ways of Mobility and Career Structures, Part 1. Moderator, Dr. Vanessa Campo-Ruiz from European Science Foundation.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. So yes, I'd like to thank the organizers and particularly Andrew Sternotas, who is coming to my rescue, for having invited me to chair this session for all of you this morning. So in our session, we discussed flexible ways of mobility, which is a topic very dear to my heart and also to my employer's heart, the European Science Foundation. We discussed a global overview of the situation in Europe based on EuroWatch data. Then we also had a very good presentation as well on academia-industry flows, so intersectoral mobility. And finally, we wrapped up with some discussion on the situation here in Lithuania and some very interesting initiatives and projects to facilitate mobility. So our conclusions or our recommendations were these 5 years, which I'm just going to try to read to you very quickly. So the first one is to increase the number of smaller grants in order to balance the focus on big, excellent players existing. The second recommendation we would like to put forward is to create incentives for the individuals, for researchers, to move from academia to industry and vice versa. So true incentives. The third one is, again, to create incentives, but this time for the organizations, both public and private, to incorporate and acknowledge the added value that these mobile researchers bring in. The fourth recommendation is to raise awareness of different researchers' career paths among students and doctoral candidates. So that's our fourth recommendation, to educate of the many possibilities out there. And fifth and final, to increase entrepreneurial competences among researchers so that they can also easily jump to industry and contribute not only to industry, but to the government, to the NGOs, and many other players of our society. So with that, I'll wrap it up within time, and I'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A2, using European structural and investment funds, and moderator Professor Alexandru Simon from Romanian Academy Center for Transylvanian Studies.
Thank you. Not this one. This one. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the organization for this invitation to be a rapporteur at this workshop. There were 3 presentations from different countries that would allow me to conclude that the different countries, they applied the structural funds in different ways. But primarily, they tried to build some capacity, some kind of research infrastructure that would support people and researchers in their development. Just recently, structural funds started to be applied to develop research skills. There were the presentation of, 2 of the presentations were about the support of doctoral and postdoctoral schools. This is a very young scheme, but although that it has a very promising impact on the regional, national and international economical development. Has recommendations. We need to continue to identify best practices in using structural funds to develop research. Also, we need to improve all the bureaucracy to use these funds locally and regionally. This is also linked with one of the presentations that were made yesterday. So we need to doing this very fast to improve the use of structural funds in research. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. B2, enhancing lifelong professional development, and moderator Sebastian Huber, Science Europe. But I see it's not Sebastian.
As you can see, I'm not Sebastian, I'm Filomena Parada, the rapporteur for the workshop. But the ideas were discussed by the 2 of us, and what I'll be presenting is the result of our discussion about we talked about in our workshop. And it's called Enhancing Lifelong Professional Development, and the focus was on early career researchers, because we agreed that lifelong learning cannot be dissociated from independence, and independence to be achieved needs to be addressed inside the system, and the system currently poses a number of problems to many of the early career researchers already in the system or trying to be a part of it in terms of more stable career possibilities made available to them. So we discussed also how to change the system, and there were these ideas that were cross-sectional to the presentations and to the debate that followed. How can we change the system? First and above all, from inside. We have to identify champions, which was, I think, a very rich, interesting expression used by one of the presenters, to change mentalities. And mentalities have to change, thinking, for instance, about the language we use to talk about these early career researchers. We call them doctoral students. They aren't students, they are doctoral candidates, they are researchers, and they should be acknowledged as members of academia as any other professional working in a university, contributing to everything that is a part of the university life. And also, they should be aware of their power and of their strength and act accordingly, because the numbers are massive. The number of those that are doctoral candidates and early career researchers are growing, and they are already a significant portion of the people working in universities. So if they organize themselves, if they recognize themselves as a force to be reckoned, that they could have a voice. Also, using leverage from different stakeholders already inside the system, like managers. Managers can play a really important role in this process of change, because messages that come from the top to the bottom, and if they are persistent enough, after a while they can break through. And also through funders, they have an ability to persuade. You shouldn't be imposing, but you can persuade. And funders can also use their influence in terms of helping to change the culture of the system. And then to recognize that these problems aren't just national or local or from one country, they are European, and also there are a ton of differences across disciplines inside science. It's not the same for all sciences, and if we think about our respective fields of research, not just because we come from country A or B, but inside one country, one system, depending on the field of research you come from, you can identify also changes. So there are a lot of levels that need to be taken into consideration and that we should think about when addressing it. And then finally, one idea that came especially from the countries, I think it can be a little bit cross-sectional to Europe, but especially in countries that are still developing their science and technology systems or that are going through economic hardships like Portugal, Greece, and so on, is the cruelty of the system that often treats early career researchers as disposables. The system feeds itself on them, and then when no longer needs them, it just disposes of them. And this has to do with another important cultural change. We should be investing on researchers and not simply on research. Human resources should be a priority, and a lot of what we discussed had to do with these cultural, deep structural changes that the system needs to address and starts to change and implement changes accordingly.
Thank you. C2, Fostering the Networks in Research, moderator Dr. Tatiana Kovachikova, representing COST. There will be no presentation, unfortunately, but I think someone maybe will be able to just say and speak it without the visuals. Or do we have something from that group? Yeah? Not necessarily Kovachikova. Anyone from the group can contribute. And please present yourself. And 2 minutes, okay? Because that's, yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Gediminas. Together with Tatiana, we made some kind of very...
Closer.
We made the kind of outcomes of our workshop. So, first of all, we made kind of very banal question, why do we need networks in research? The simple answers are that to increase the quality of research, when you are working in the group, it's much better. To attract the funds, when you are alone, it's not possible to get good grants. And for sure, to improve your excellence in the career. Then the second question we arise in our discussion, is it easy to build the networks? We are talking about the networks, but is it easy to build the networks? No, it's not easy. First of all, you need to identify your values, what you want to reach. Then establishing the role within the networks, it's very important. Also, difficulties that different actors in the networks, they have different expectations and also cultural differences. Yeah, so how we should build or how we foster the networks in the research, what we can do. The good example was from the University of Vilnius. They have a good labs to do laser technologies. So access to the unique research facilities, that's the very strong point, and to exchange those facilities within the researchers. Preparing researchers to move from one to another place, that's essential to be mobile and also to link research and industry. So, our last slide and take-home message. The networks in research are essential. All of us agree on that. Especially for the young researchers who can bring the new ideas in the European research area. And the last message is that it's not easy to build the networks, but we have the tools to build them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That were nearly 2 minutes. Very good. And last but not least, D2, Seeking Flexible Ways of Mobility and Career Structures, Part 2. Moderator, Dr. Miguel Horsch, sorry. University of Strathclyde. Yeah, that's okay? You correct me, yeah?
So the two of us will present the conclusions of a very diverse group of researchers, many of whom are mobile themselves. And in order to make the take-home messages clearer, we arranged them in a temporal order. So we recognize, and this is one of the main research observations from the group, that the benefits of mobility come at a cost, usually at the expense of career stability. And at the level of PhD programs, usually PhD candidates are not the focus of their institution's recruitment policies, but we know that. So we try hard, and institutions try hard. But then once PhD programs are over, this beautiful networking processes of grad school are also over. And so we discussed, as you can see on the slide, the issues, the obstacles to mobility faced by post-PhD researchers and senior level researchers, and also some horizontal transversal problems such as bureaucracy, which is very discouraging for mobile researchers. And another observation from the research done by the members of the working group showed that across the countries, researchers usually leave their home country for career-related reasons. They want to cooperate with the high-class researchers and access equipment or research environments. They return for personal, cultural, or family-related reasons. But with better communication technologies, keeping in touch with families becomes easier. So how long can countries free ride on researchers' willingness to reconnect with their family and culture? And for this we have some recommendations.
So it's not all about complaining, right? So we come up with some recommendations, hopefully. So we recognize, like Daiva was saying, that mobility is good, but it's not all good. It may cause some problems. And some of them were identified by Daiva in the previous slide. So one of the ways to tackle this is to implement, for example, dual career services in higher education institutions. We saw some examples of very good practice where couples are supported because sometimes one of the partners needs to relinquish their career in favor of the other partner. Especially, not only, but especially for females, that's a very big problem. Going now to the post-PhD issue. It was shown how research staff associations can help support mobility and facilitate peer mentoring, which becomes very important for you to establish your own network at that level. Regarding the more senior level, and the issue, which is very important, that mobility actually makes it difficult for you to consolidate your position. Actually, there was a study that showed some numbers on this, and in some countries, there's a wide disparity between mobile researchers, which tend to be temporary, and permanent positions, which tend to be occupied by people who stayed in that country. And some ideas to overcome this is to come up with support mechanisms for mobile researchers. But very importantly, they should be for stable positions, not only temporary, because what we've seen so far is funding for temporary mobile positions. But what happens when one wants to become stable after being mobile? Okay, so there's a gap there. The other issue, the other recommendation is to create incentives for institutions themselves to start valuing strongly highly mobile researchers. And again, there's a caveat. It was very clear that the focus should be on practical implementation, not only on rules and regulations that are on paper. Because it appears very clearly that several countries, although on paper, they are actually following, for example, the principles of the Charter and Code. In practice, that's not happening. And so we need to come up with clever ways of rewarding countries and institutions that are doing this in practice, okay? And that will help mobility. So thank you very much on behalf of you.
Thank you very much.